So for my quiz 2, I'll be synthesizing the long-running impacts of desegregation and George Bush's No Child Left Behind Act. So to start off with desegregation, I did the long-running impacts, that article, and it basically talked about how it benefited Black people as a whole once these schools got integrated. And some of the common themes that I noticed was better school quality to begin with. They had a smaller teacher to student ratio than before, better curriculum, higher qualified teachers, things of that nature. Of course, not including, I'm not talking about the bullying and things like that in the beginning. As far as a personal, I'm talking about a grand scheme of things. They also had better health, which kind of took me by surprise, but I guess it was kind of like a, if you know better, you do better. So they kind of had more opportunities to be confident and to go request for help from doctors and things of that nature. They also had 11% decline in poverty, I think 25% increase in family income, and then there was a decline in criminal activity. There was just all over, it was looking up for the Black community as a whole once these schools got integrated, because their level of education is now increasing. They're not as behind as they were before. And then if you fast forward to the No Child Left Behind Act with George Bush, he created this No Child Left Behind Act to kind of push or bring the minorities up to the speed that the majority population was at as far as education wise, to make sure, well, his goal was to basically have an all or nothing student achievement and bring all these students to be proficient by 2014. I think he wanted, like, I want to say pushing 100%, but by 2010 they noticed that that wasn't going to happen, and only about 50% of students in the nation were proficient. He also wanted it to have no Black or white schools, but only failing or succeeding schools. And then those failing schools had 3 years essentially to make their numbers turn around. And if they did not, achieve that, they faced state intervention. They could request money for tutoring or services to improve test scores, or the parents could actually transfer their students out of these failing schools and take them to a successful school. His goal was to basically awaken the achievement gap, essentially, or maybe even just make it known to people, and then in terms to close it. So I feel like he had right intentions, but it didn't go as well as he hoped it would have. He really wanted schools to also, schools in low-income neighborhoods to have the same expectations as the schools in the suburban areas or things of that nature. There are a few things that come to my mind, but desegregation in the public schools was my grandparents' generation. George Bush was my generation. So there's only one generation in between that. So it makes me really think, were the schools who got desegregated really being treated equally and fairly? Or was it that once they saw how much the Black community was benefiting, something happened, right? Because why would we need a No Child Left Behind Act so far down the road if the schools are integrated now, and minorities are getting better education as a whole, and all of these things? So it made me think that, are you, and when I say are you, I'm speaking on George Bush, cleaning up an issue that was essentially created? Because what happened in that gap, and the only thing I can think of is maybe like the crack epidemic and how that destroyed minority communities and neighborhoods and things of that nature. That's like the only thing I can truly think of to have that switch, but it is interesting to see, trying to make sure I didn't miss anything out of my notes. It is interesting to see that how much desegregation benefited Black people, even with higher graduation rates, better wages. I think I left that out as well. Lower crime rate, just overall growth, essentially, whether that was education or physically or financially. So who was pissed off? That's kind of what that makes me think of. Who was pissed off? what happened in that one generation gap from the schools being desegregated until now. And it makes me think of my grandparents because I'm actually doing my historical project on them, and desegregation. But my grandma was saying to me that a lot of stuff she went through when she was, well, when schools first integrated, obviously we have a much better education than what she had. But it just makes me think what happened from her generation to my parents' generation to now mine, where there was this need of an act or laws to be established to bring up the education or close the education gap, or try to close. I'm not going to say it was closed, but I'm say try to close between the minorities and the majority. So kind of left me with questions to make me want to kind of dig deep and see, well, what happened in the middle. What was the shift that made the government say, oh wow, we really do have another issue on our hands? You know, maybe the minorities are now slacking, or maybe they're just doing too well. We don't want them to do too well, so let's make it look like, oh, we're trying to pull them up. But what really brought them down in the first place? So that's my quiz 2.